Welcome to the Tuesday edition of One's World, and here I am on my couch. I'm going to give you some anthropology slash philosophy today. It's in line with what I'm doing for my Streets of Phnom Penh research, but a little bit sideways. I want to talk about generalizations, because that's one of the things that anthropologists like to do. They like to make generalizations. And the problem with generalizations is that most of the time they're wrong because they're too general. There are some things that you can generalize, particularly in areas like mathematics. You can make certain generalizations that will always hold true. Right? An even number. Okay, there's a category. An even number. An even number is a number that when you divide it by 2, you have no remainder. That's a generalization, and that always works. It doesn't work when you try to generalize about people's behavior. And that's what I want to talk about today. So let's get started. Now, how I came to this was by observing a lot of YouTube channels that gave advice. And I don't make a regular habit out of it, but I work pretty hard. And, you know, like when you get writing 12, 13, 14 hours a day, like sometimes just in the cracks you need a little break. And sometimes I will pop on a YouTube channel. I pull up YouTube, and the algorithm, which thinks it knows what I want, will pop up maybe something about the contemporary world, politics, various issues. And recently, I've noticed a couple of people who want to talk about what men want or what women want. And they're very popular channels, get, you know, hundreds of thousands of, sometimes even millions of views, for something that I find, not going to go so far as to say stupid, but ill-considered. And it's been my general tack for a long time to say that any time you hear somebody say, well, men are blah, 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 or women are blah, 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 or Khmer people are blah, 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 or English people are, right? What follows the ... is going to be wrong. It's going to be too much of a generalization. Like, English people tend to be reserved. That's true. They don't like to talk to strangers. Let's say waiting for a bus, or at the train station waiting for the train to come in. Generally speaking, they don't. They keep to themselves. They don't talk to strangers. They might if it's an unusual situation, like they're at a station they don't know, and they're not sure about the train's arrival or something, so they might possibly turn to somebody and say, oh, excuse me, can you tell me what time the next train to Brighton is going to arrive, or something like that. Maybe. But generally speaking, no. I used to take a train after work when I was first teaching in the town where I grew up, but I taught in that town, but I lived in Oxford, and so I used to take a train home to Oxford each night. And sometimes I had to wait a while. There's a waiting room. So you sit down in the waiting room and nobody talks. But I remember one famous time, at least famous for me, when there was something, I don't know, it was either a rail strike or a derailment or something like that. But the normal train, which I think should arrive maybe about 4:45 or something like that, was 2 hours late. And we didn't actually know when it was going to arrive. So we all just sat in the waiting room and eventually started talking. And after, maybe about, it took a while. I'd say we were there for about 20, 30 minutes without anyone talking. But somebody piped up, and then eventually the whole waiting room was talking. And we talked and talked for a very long time. Finally, the train came, and we were all standing on the platform, giving the train a clap when it arrived. And then we got on and stopped talking. That circumstance had disappeared. All right, so you can say that generally speaking, English people don't talk to strangers. That would be a fair enough generalization, but it's not going to be 100% certain. Even in normal circumstances, there are going to be people who will just out of the blue talk to a stranger for some reason or another. It's not common, but it happens. So that you can't think of generalizations as being 100% certain. What you end up with, if you're not careful, is stereotypes. One of the great stereotypes that I absolutely can't stand is the stereotype that the English can't cook. England is full of wonderful food, but if you're a stranger to the place, you will not know it. When I lived in Myanmar, one of my friends who was it's Chinese Myanmar had a trip to England, and he went on Facebook periodically and showing, because he's typical Asian. He loves to have a big picture of himself, outside Man United Stadium or outside the Houses of Parliament or whatever. And he would occasionally show pictures of food. And what was the food? Fish and chips. Okay, that's bog standard stuff. And then what else? Well, then he went to a Thai restaurant. He lives in Myanmar. He can go to a Thai restaurant any day of the week. But he goes to England and he goes to a Thai restaurant. He could go to a Bengali restaurant or Goanese restaurant, because a lot of Indian, Pakistani immigrants in England, and they've created a lot of wonderful dishes in England. Chicken tikka masala is one of the most favorite dishes in all of England, and it's invented in England for the English palate, but it's from India. And there are regional sausages and cheeses. There are 420 named cheeses in England, and rivals France. But you've never heard of them. Have you ever heard of Beanley Blue, for example, or Shropshire Blue, even? There are at least 50 different blue cheeses alone. Blue Vinny, Dorsetshire Blue Vinny, is a soft cheese from the south of England. Cumberland sausage. Won't mention black sausage because that's like blood sausage. Like a lot of people don't like that. But that's a breakfast food along with bacon and eggs and baked beans. English full breakfast is not my favorite, but there are just so many dishes. Kedgeree. Mulligatawny. There's so many dishes that are wonderful, but the stereotype is, the English, the English have bad teeth and they make bad food. Right? Well, that's just a stereotype that's wrong. But when you generalize like that on like YouTube videos, you're steering people wrong, and I see it so much of the time. I mean, just the other day, I clicked on maybe 2 or 3 different channels, all of which were saying, this is what women want, or this is what men think. Well, it's just stupid. I mean, one of them was, I don't remember how many. I mean, there's always a number, 5, 7, 10, 12, whatever. Like this was 7 things not to say on a first date. Well, let's see. I don't remember, maybe since my wife died, I've had maybe 8 girlfriends. So yeah, well, at least I've been on 8, probably more, but certainly 8 first dates. And everyone was different. So you can't say, for example, don't talk about your ex on your first date, or don't talk about your childhood. I don't honestly remember, but I'm just thinking, well, I talked about my ex. I mean, I talked about my late wife on 2 first dates. I mean, you could say something like, because this one goes both ways. It's like, don't badmouth exes ever, because that says something about you rather than about them. All right, but don't talk about them on a first date. Well, sometimes I did and sometimes I didn't. And in either case, whether I did or I didn't, I went out with the women subsequently. And it's the same with like, don't don't extend things too long. That's another one. It's like, okay, well, the last girlfriend I had in the United States, the first date it was 9 hours. It wasn't meant to be. We met for lunch, we met for like quote unquote coffee. I don't actually drink coffee, but we met for coffee. I think it was a little around 12 o'clock, something like that. And the idea was, well, we'll see how it goes, and see what to do from there. Well, we had our tea and coffee or whatever. Then we decided to have lunch. Then we kept talking, and people kept coming and going. And I think by about 4 o'clock, the place got really noisy and we couldn't talk, and decided to go somewhere else. And we were in the village where the woman lived. So and she was sort of reluctant at first, but then she said, "Well, let's go back to my place," which is a very strange thing to do on a first date, to go to the woman's apartment, because that has all kinds of connotations. But we went there, and we talked, and things got deeper and more personal and so forth. And I ended up going home at 9 o'clock. So it was a 9-hour date, and we ended up going out for 2 years after that. But I've been on other first dates that have been, really pretty short. Not even an hour, for one reason or another. You can't generalize about these things. You absolutely cannot generalize about what women want and what men want. It's my great concern that people want to decide that there's something that we can identify stereotypically or generally as masculine, or generally as feminine, to the point where we start talking about, a man having a feminine side or a woman having a masculine side. Well, it's just nonsense. I mean, people are complicated. And to identify a trait as masculine is overgeneralizing. I mean, there's some things that are fair. I mean, like men's voices tend to be deeper than women's voices. But you can't say a man is feminine because he has a high voice, or a woman is masculine because she has a low voice, although they may sometimes cultivate a deeper voice. A very famous case of Elizabeth Holmes, who, when she was trying to sell her fake company Theranos, her voice got deeper and deeper and deeper. So there are tendencies that we identify, but to say that a man who is caring and loving and nurturing and kind is feminine is ludicrous. That's like, those are equally traits of men and of women. There's a tendency to want to generalize, to say, well, women give birth, and historically in our culture they look after the children, and the men don't, and don't like doing it, and don't like children and so forth. But that's a false generalization. I looked after my son all of his growing up, and so did my wife. But we shared it equally, and I wouldn't want to say that she was any better than me. I mean, she wasn't terribly good at it, but nor was I. I mean, we were sort of okay. And one of the reasons it was a trial was that my son was difficult. He didn't sleep. He used to go to bed at like maybe 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and then he was up for good at 4 o'clock in the morning. And he was always crying and complaining, and it was difficult. So I don't know that either of us was any good or not, but I took care of him, and I think I was as loving and nurturing as my wife was. So to talk about my loving and caring and nurturing side as my feminine side is ridiculous. It's who I am. And women who are strong and have strong opinions and take command and so forth, they're not being masculine. They're being who they are too. Like, people are complicated. That's, I guess, what my message is. And that's when we start talking about the streets of Phnom Penh, or the culture of the Khmer people, or what have you, when you start generalizing, you're going to be wrong. Now, there are some things that you can say with a fair degree of certainty. Like, if you get into a tuk-tuk without negotiating the fare, when you get to the destination, the tuk-tuk driver is going to overcharge you. Now, there may be 1 in a million somewhere who is like absolutely hardline honest, but if you don't negotiate the fare ahead of time, you're going to get overcharged. That's all there is to it. All right, so that's a generalization that I think will stick. And there are a fair number of generalizations about Khmer people that I know from talking to them. But I wouldn't want to write an ethnography and say all Khmer people are friendly or cautious or shy, or they're all those things at different times in the day, or in the month or the year, depending on who they're talking to. They have a tendency to shy away from foreigners under most circumstances, but not if they're in some kind of business. So like a tuk-tuk driver will be the opposite. Like if he sees a foreigner, he'll wave to him, and say, well, you want to ride. Um, I've just discovered recently that they do that with Khmer people also, mainly because people don't walk here very much. But we can't generalize from any of these statements and make sense. If I say Khmer people don't walk, well, that's just not true, but they mostly don't. But I'm near a factory where women work. It's a garment factory, I think, and the bulk of them walk to work. The ones who don't live too far, but others ride motorbikes or bicycles. You can't make any kind of generalization about walking, but if somebody's walking, for the most part, tuk-tuk drivers will not approach them unless they're foreigners, but they may. So we can talk about tendencies, but we can't talk about stereotypes or overgeneralize. And that's true of ethnography as a whole. And this is the problem that anthropology has right now. And it's one that deeply distresses me. And that anthropologists on the whole are beginning to say things like, if we cannot generalize about people in a culture, then we can't really say anything. Well, that's not true. I mean, what they start off by saying we can't really define what a culture is. Well, I just think that's disingenuous. I've just written a book called Messy Ethnography, Does Englishness Exist? And my simple answer is, yes, it does exist, but it's complicated. It's not a single thing. But I can still say with fair certainty, if I meet somebody, as an English person. Now, they may have an accent from the very north, and it's very hard to understand. They may not exhibit stereotypic traits, but I can still say that person's an English person. That person's a Khmer person. But all cultures contain variations. In England, everyone wants to say that the Scottish people are stingy, or thrifty, if you like, and all Irish people are drunks, or and so on. All right, well, those are false stereotypes. But all stereotypes are also based on some kind of underlying generalism that has some kind of validity. And we can legitimately say that there are such things as Scottish people, Irish people, Welsh people, and they are different. Now, on the borders, that's the thing. On the borders, things get fuzzy. When you get to the border of Scotland and England, the accents change very slightly as you go north from London. You go north. You eventually get to a point where I don't know whether this person's Scottish or English, because we're in England, but the accent sounds like Lowland Scots. There's a place called Berwick-on-Tweed, which has been part of Scotland sometimes historically, part of England sometimes historically. And if you live south of Berwick-on-Tweed and you hear their accents, you're inclined to say they're Scottish. But if you live north of them and you hear them, you're inclined to say that they're English. They're what we call a liminal category. They're not quite one thing or the other. But just because you can't always identify things on the borders doesn't mean that the center isn't there somehow, that there isn't some kind of central English characteristic or central Scottish characteristic that is, in some sense, defining. Not a generalization, but what what the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein called family resemblances. Like when you think about a family you know and you say they all look alike, it doesn't mean that they're all carbon copies of each other. It means that they've got features that they share around. Maybe they've got, like facial features. Maybe there's 5 or 6 facial features, like the nose, the eyes, the ears, the type of hair, so forth, color of hair, color of eyes. But they don't all have the same color of eyes, or the same color of hair, or the same jawline, or the same nose. But the aggregate makes them part of a set of family resemblances. And that's true of cultures too. Like within the culture, you've got quite a variety of variables, but they aggregate to create something that is recognizable. So I don't watch too many YouTube videos anymore because I just get disgusted by their tendency to want to generalize beyond reason. So that's my final point, I guess, is that generalization is all right up to a point, right? As long as you surround it with weasel words and caveats and whatnot, then you're all right. But when you start saying that all women are this, or all men are this, then you're wrong. All Muslims are this, all Christians are this, all Jews are this. That's where bigotry starts to raise its ugly head, and it's wrong. The end. All right, so if you like my video, please like, please subscribe. I'll be back on Friday. I think probably I'm going to be giving you some videos of the streets of Phnom Penh. I think. I don't know. It's early in the week yet. I've got to go to the dentist and go see the doctor and all that. So my life may be turned upside down. But anyway, have a good week, and I'll see you on Friday.